Welcome to our Network Friday Forum, Reentry, Supportive Housing, Lessons from LA. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is JoAnne. I'm the Engagement and Communications Manager at the network, and this is our final forum in a series of forums that we've hosted this month in June in lieu of our annual conference. I want to express deep gratitude to our sponsors and our nonprofit partners who generously supported the series and therefore us. Please visit our exhibitor gallery. We'll be posting that link in the chat. And thank you everyone for tuning in throughout the series. We miss seeing everyone in person at the Marriott. We wish we could all drink and celebrate after this, but we're eternally grateful for you for sticking by our side amidst these difficult and virtual times. And we look forward to seeing you in person soon. I want to thank all of my colleagues for helping put this series together, and especially my partner in crime, Emily Levine. And we'll be sharing the recordings out of the series next week. If you missed any or you want to rewatch any, you'll have them. But so I want to bring us to today's conversation. We're excited to end this series with an extremely important discussion on reentry supportive housing and the intersection of criminal legal systems and housing. We're always looking for ways to make improvements to our supportive housing, and it's a privilege to learn from our friends in Los Angeles. And naturally, we have New York City's Fortune Society framing and moderating this discussion. And then we'll have time for Q&A from the audience. So please put your questions in the Q&A function. Thank you again for joining us. We always encourage people to be active in the chat, introduce yourself, respond to things that you hear. We love to see that you're active and hear from you. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce the amazing JoAnne Page, Executive Director at Fortune Society, to get the conversation started. Thank you so much, JoAnne.
Thank you so much, Joelle. It's a pleasure to be here. And I want to say special thanks to the network because you have been incredible during the most intensive period of COVID in terms of helping supportive housing providers provide the supportive housing that's needed. So what I'd like to do is start by framing the issue and then turn it over to our friends from LA to talk about what they're doing and to see what we can learn from you. So Fortune is an organization of over 50 years old. We work with perhaps 9,000 individuals released from incarceration each year. We've been doing housing for the last 20 or so years, first emergency and transitional, then permanent supportive. And behind me, you see our buildings for emergency, transitional, and permanent supportive housing, starting with the castle, which is directly behind my head. What I want to do is talk about some of the reentry population challenges and the intersection with homelessness. So people who've been to prison experience homelessness at rates 7 times higher than the general population. If they've been locked up more than once, the rate is 13 times higher. The Brennan Center looked at the lifetime earnings of people who've been incarcerated and found that they had a 50% cut in earning over their lifetimes as compared to other people similarly situated, which speaks to people's ability to afford market rents when they get out of prison. We're already talking about people who face enormous barriers due to systemic racism, due to education issues. With incarceration, think of that income cut in half. Pre-COVID, about half of the people released from New York State Prison to New York City were released to the shelters. I think it probably is worse now, but we don't have data. There is a very high substance abuse and mental health need among incarcerated people. In fact, the large provider for mental health services in our country is the local jail, the local prison. We also see that people released from incarceration have the health issues of people 10 years older. So they have enormous needs for services. Many really require permanent supportive housing. The supply is insufficient to meet the need generally, but most people being incarcerated are precluded from what's existing in permanent supportive housing in New York because most requires chronic homelessness, which means absolutely nobody released from state prison, and most of the people released from jail, no matter how high their needs, need to live in the street or live in the shelters for a while before they're eligible for permanent supportive housing. We see real struggles in New York with the current scattered site model. And that is that the funding for most of the programs is fixed. And as the rent keeps going up year by year, it cannibalizes the service dollars that are available. So with contracts under, say, New York 3, providers are giving them back because they can't afford to keep them. Because if you run it for a certain number of years, you don't have anything left but rent money. New York's done better in terms of a new model where the rent is paid separately, but we need to see more of that. And we need to see sufficient dollars for the service side. And what we're seeing is scattered site not being bid on, scattered site being returned. We see programs like JISH, Justice Informed Supportive Housing, where the funding is not sufficient to encourage bidders to come in, and there have been a dearth of bidders on the outstanding contracts. So the question is, what can we learn from Los Angeles? And we are lucky enough to hear about 2 programs, Brilliant Corners and Project 180. And I would like to turn the microphone over to Jose Osuna to talk about Brilliant Corners.
Thanks, JoAnne. And thank you to the network for having Brilliant Corners on as a panelist today. In particular, thank you for asking myself to be on today. If we can put on the slides, I've got a few slides for folks today, and I'll use that as a way of introduction as well, not just on myself, but on Brilliant Corners and the work we're doing out here in LA. I got to remember to say good afternoon because I'm out here in LA and it's still morning time out here. It's about 10 a.m. out here, but good afternoon to all of you out there on the East Coast. My name is Jose Osuna, and I'm the Housing Justice Manager at Brilliant Corners. I also serve as a member of the Public Safety Realignment Team for the County of Los Angeles. I was appointed to that role by one of the county supervisors, Supervisor Janice Hahn. And I'm happy to share with you today about Brilliant Corners strategies in how we house our most vulnerable neighbors. Overall, how we increase access to affordable, permanent housing for those folks. We'll discuss our cornerstone program, the Flexible Housing Subsidy Pool, and the successes we've seen through this approach. Brilliant Corners is a permanent supportive housing nonprofit organization operating statewide here in California to provide innovative housing and housing-related services to individuals transitioning from or at risk of homelessness or institutionalization. We work at the intersection of housing and multiple service sectors, developmental services, homeless services, public health, and managed care. We also provide veteran services, and we serve the criminal justice system as well. In short, wherever permanent supportive housing offers a platform for systems change, an inclusive community, and personal well-being, that's where Brilliant Corners wants to be at. Next slide, please. We do this work because of a deeply held belief that the solution to homelessness is simple. By providing housing and the supportive services that help people thrive, we are getting people housed. Pretty simple. But it's not easy, and that's where Brilliant Corners comes in. We do the hard work of finding the units, streamlining tenant-unit matching, pairing wraparound services, and leveraging local and federal vouchers to get people housed and keep them housed. We do this in partnership with many other organizations here in Los Angeles, and we do this in partnership with the county as well. Our approach professionalizes housing locator services and tenancy supports in order to streamline the process for our partner agencies, our local governments, and our managed care partners. Next slide, please. Starting in 2015, Brilliant Corners began to operate the Flexible Housing Subsidy in partnership with the Los Angeles County Department of Health Services in order to facilitate housing for extremely low-income households, high utilizers of public services, and other vulnerable populations. The Flex Pool, as we call it for short, is a system-changing innovation that unlocks a range of housing options and ensures housing stability through dedicated landlord engagement, rent subsidy administration, and a variety of tenancy supports. The flex pool model is also innovative in how it leverages and blends many different funding systems here in Los Angeles. Our flex pool manages resources for the Departments of Health and Mental Health, the State Board of Community Corrections, LA Care, which is a public health care plan, the Office of Diversion and Reentry here in Los Angeles County, and more. Next slide, please. So we've done a lot of work. Through the flex pool alone, we have housed cumulatively 8,965 individuals. So we're getting close to the 9,000 mark here. And ultimately, we really want to set a milestone around housing 10,000 folks through the flex pool. That's our short-term goal. Tenants, landlords, sector leadership, and the public all benefit from Brilliant Corners' approach to supportive housing. Our greatest impact, however, is system-level change. LA County's Housing for Health Division credits us with doubling the number of people they house annually. In 2017, the RAND Corporation found that for every dollar invested in LA's flex pool, the county saved $1.20 in healthcare and other costs, among the largest savings ever concerning homelessness. Next slide, please. So what's really unique about this model? At scale, a pooled housing approach helps match vulnerable individuals with housing options available in real time to meet the public health emergency of homelessness, because this truly is a health crisis. Brilliant Corners' strategy of cultivating a network of landlord and developer partners and securing units on an ongoing basis creates a pool of units that can be immediately matched to any client at risk of or currently experiencing homelessness, thereby reducing the time it takes to get people housed. Our model is based on the motivations of the landlord. We have professionalized landlord engagement through dedicated relationship management and a package of incentives and streamlined financial tools that greatly appeal to private market landlords and the motivations of our clients. Client choice is a major factor in this process. The units we source are geared towards matching client needs and preferences on the front end, so as to also expedite the matching process. People keenly aware of skyrocketing rents across California may assume that lack of housing inventory and landlord reluctance are the biggest barriers to getting people housed. That's not the case. While such skepticism is understandable, Brilliant Corners has succeeded in tapping the wide range of private market units through dedicated landlord engagement. The scale and pace of our private market supportive housing placements over the past 6 years demonstrates the ability to rapidly scale a housing platform in the most difficult rental markets. And believe me, living here myself, I can tell you that the rental market is pretty ridiculous. Next slide, please. How do we do it? Well, here's how Brilliant Corners has made nearly 9,000 permanent supportive housing placements through the flex pool since 2015. Our approach is based on flexibility and streamlining the process for our partners. Our housing acquisition team finds new units and cultivates property providers to source new units and maintain unit stock. Our tenancy support team provides housing retention services to clients, facilitates move-ins, liaises between client, case manager, and property provider to resolve tenant-specific housing-related issues. You'll notice that the case managers mentioned here, and you're gonna hear a lot more about that from my colleague Herminio Zuniga in a few minutes regarding the case management component of the flex housing pool. Our operations team administers all payments, including rent subsidies and move-in assistance. They process applications, perform admin and financial support for the housing acquisition and tenancy support teams, and they ensure a successful transition into housing. In order to do that, we collect information regarding client needs and preferences. So very client-centered, very client-focused approach including their family and other folks that may be important to them in their lives. This helps target our acquisition, but more importantly, it helps us make better matches to those units. Next slide, please. Another key ingredient to our approach is a focus on housing retention. After moving into a unit, tenants receive ongoing support from Brilliant Corners housing coordinators and our partners during the lease to ensure positive tenant-landlord relationships and lease compliance. Next slide, please. One of the big takeaways for us in operating the Flex Pool is that the combination of housing locator services, tenancy support, and wraparound case management is the key recipe for success. And professionalizing each of these functions, because they are different skill sets. They all contribute to program impact, exceptional service for clients and landlord partners alike, and the ability to really scale these placements up at a rapid pace. We know how homelessness is a profound inequity that requires a strategic alignment of cross-sector entities. And most importantly, we know housing is the key to ending homelessness, with supportive services to keep people housed. Through this effective, evidence-based strategy, I hope that hearing more about our approach has been helpful. And we look forward to answering any questions you may have. I'm now going to turn it over to my great friend and colleague, Herminio Zuniga, who gets to do this work on a daily basis and has really dug into that intersection between folks coming out of the reentry system and dealing with homelessness. So without any further ado, I'll turn the floor over to Herminio.
Herminio, we are not hearing you.
Can you guys hear me now?
Okay, there, much better.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So thanks a lot, Joel, for your presentation. Your numbers kind of match over here in some parts of Los Angeles. 70% is a recidivism rate. One can even argue that it's bigger, it's greater than that. I work for Project 180 as a program coordinator. I've been at Project 180 for a few years. I also have worked in court as a liaison, advocating for some of our participants. I've worked in the pretrial program, helping people who are being diverted, or shall I say, not being criminalized. And I've also done other things around there. Project 180 pretty much, we offer a sort of a, I hate to use for lack of better words, the one-stop shop, reference. We pretty much cover the wraparound component to the Flex Pool. And as Jose was saying, it's very important to understand some of the things that, we are responsible for. And I think that that's one of the greatest challenges is oftentimes as a case manager, you lose sight of the responsibility or the task at hand, right? So to go off and expand on that, one of the biggest challenges, and I'll speak about me personally, I was once a case manager, and one of the biggest challenges is understanding that I'm supposed to be client-centered. That happens a lot. When you see the whole tenancy support, people tend to forget that also means supporting the landlord, and in that way, I'm advocating for the client. That is something that on that level, on the ground level, is never spoken of, right? We often worry about the funding and all that stuff, which, we couldn't do this work without it. But on that floor level, there's a lot of holes and cracks. And as a case manager, one of the biggest challenges was how you won't even realize when you become non-client centered and you're more concerned with getting the documentation in, or, we become more concerned with, making sure that our job is being done. and not the crisis or the support that the client needs. That's one of the greatest challenges. Another challenge is understanding the role of our partners. In this case, Brilliant Corners. When I first started doing this work, I wasn't really about housing first. I didn't understand what that was. And I often, did not realize that the participants were leaving sometimes, because they didn't appreciate all the other barriers that we were additionally, adding to what they already had to go through. You're reporting to a probation officer, you're reporting to a probation case manager, you're reporting to a clinician, you're reporting to a case manager, you're reporting to another case manager, you're reporting to the partner's clinician. And so a lot of times a lot of the participants just leave because it becomes almost like an extension of them being punitive, being punished or incarcerated. And that was one of the biggest challenges. I didn't understand what Brilliant Corners did. And if I may, I'd like to, share a couple of stories, if you guys will, that have touched me. And I have these two individuals in my heart to this day. I learned a lot. I had some very learning moments. The first one was a gentleman who, after getting to know everything about him below the tip of the iceberg and understanding his childhood and everything that comes along, with his experience, he had been using heroin since he was a child, and he was in his 50s or 60s. He was an elder gentleman. And for over a year, he had maintained his apartment and he wasn't going back to jail anymore. He wasn't being remanded. He wasn't in trouble. The only thing that was a problem, according to some people, was his drug use. So this gentleman was kind of in a position where I sort of went along with maybe being focused on not getting not getting an eviction on his record, because then we wouldn't be able to find him anything later on. Once again, I kind of slipped into worrying about my needs as a case manager and not his needs as a person who is impacted. So he ends up relinquishing his unit, and lo and behold, once that happened, he ended up going back to jail. So the day came when we got him released. I walked out of court with him, and he starts, just letting me know how he feels. And all the sheriff deputies in the courthouse were just looking at us. And the guy's like, "Hey man, is everything okay?" I had to show him my badge. "Yeah, we're fine." So I finally asked this gentleman, "Okay, can we," I had to apologize and ask him if we can start over. And I had to hear him. I had to listen to what he needed and not think what he wanted, for him. So I asked him, "What is the problem? Where did we go wrong? Please tell me about me." It was a very peer supportive moment. Instead of looking at him as a subject or below me, I looked at him as an equal, and I heard him, and he let me have it. This gentleman told me, "You guys," these are his words, and I'll never forget it, "You guys are just worried about all the bad things I'm doing. You're concerned with my drug use. You're concerned about who I'm sleeping with. You guys are worried about what I'm doing in my personal life." And then he says it, "But you're never paying attention to the fact that I've had this apartment for over a year. The landlord likes me and I keep it clean. I keep my apartment clean. I keep my apartment clean and I pay my rent. What is the problem?" And that was one of the first times that I realized I do not understand what Brilliant Corners does. I really do not understand. So that was the first time that I realized, wow, we essentially helped this guy go back to jail with that. And that was the first time that I started to really question, how I was doing my job. And I started working closer with Jose and in understanding what Brilliant Corners really does. And that's when I realized that, okay, this housing first thing, it's not necessarily, oh, we got to get them housing first, but more housing is more important, and with that, I want to go to one more story of a gentleman. Oh, you know what, that guy, he has been in the cycle of recidivism ever since. Now that he doesn't have his apartment, he's just spiraling downward. So I wanted to share that just to, remind everyone that that's very important, is that we remember that we're client-centered, and not industry-centered, if you will. And another story I want to share is about a young man. This one is very tough. In his case, I want to talk about tenancy support. And also that entails supporting the landlord and the neighbors, essentially. This gentleman was having a lot of mental health crises, and his neighbors weren't understanding. And you know what? In their defense, they were afraid. He was stigmatized. They didn't understand that he wasn't really violent. He was just having a mental health crisis. He didn't have any support. So this gentleman was having the police go out to talk to him every other day. The landlord was tired of him. The neighbors were tired of him. He was on the verge of catching another case, and we wanted to avoid that. So the first thing I noticed was that the Brilliant Corners representative, once again, I was still learning that, okay, we don't just get them to leave their unit and put them in interim housing or a shelter, because that can be even worse. And that's usually what happens. Oh, let's put them somewhere else. But that small window, that somewhere else where you're putting them in the meantime, can make things worse. And oftentimes it's more dangerous for our participants. So the Brilliant Corners representative had to tell me, hey, look, you need to understand something. I'm not here to help you case manage. I'm just here to help this guy not lose his housing. So I had to sort of understand that I had to support the Brilliant Corners in helping this guy keep his unit. And then I had to support this gentleman with his relationship with the landlord. Then I had to support the landlord, and talk to the neighbors. So I had to do this whole thing where I kind of became like the de facto case manager for this scattered site for the building. And then one day it happened. One of the neighbors came to me and said she was concerned for his life. And what we ended up realizing was all we needed was a little intervention. If the case manager or treatment team had just gone out there a little more, instead of texting this guy or calling this guy, the situation could have probably been resolved. And even though nothing happened and the guy is okay now, his life was in danger. So that's another challenge that we face, is we don't understand the role of our partners sometimes, and we need to really work together. And sometimes that does not happen. And it's only because in this field, everyone is tired. Everyone is working hard. And oftentimes communication is the key. I know that that's probably a broken record, but it really is the key. So I just wanted to share that. Those are the challenges on that level as a case manager, or at, on the ground level, not understanding, the partnerships, and not understanding that we should always be client centered first. So I think I'm going on now. So thank you guys for that.
Herminio, thank you for putting a human face on the work that we all do. So one of the questions that people were asking is, can you give a very brief overview of what the wraparound services entail?
Sure.
And how many people you serve?
So wraparound at Project 180, what that means is we have an emphasis on people who are impacted by incarceration with substance use and mental health needs, especially mental health needs. And we serve, it's very hard because the numbers fluctuate. Participants leave. I would say that right now, I can actually give you an estimate. It's probably like around a little over 200 people, because we have different programs. We have AB 109, we have pretrial, we have intensive case management services, we have FIST, MIST, we have a competency program. 200 would actually be an understatement. It's probably more than that. I'm not the person to give those figures, so I really couldn't say, but it is a lot, because people, once they leave and if they decide they want to come back in a month or 2 weeks, we welcome them back in. So it's always fluctuating. I'll tell you, it's a lot though. There's a lot of faces in the community. And what was your other question?
What are the wraparound services that you folks offer?
So we offer reunification, of course, housing through working with Brilliant Corners. Interim housing, we offer peer support. We also offer navigation. A lot of people need help getting basic things like public social service or even medical care. So we provide that intensive case management to help them with every aspect of their need. So it's wrapped around in every sense.
Okay, thank you. So just stepping back, For either of you, either Jose or Herminio, what are the most important lessons that you think we can learn in New York from the programs that you run?
I think one of the things that, and we're still learning this here in LA too. So we're not, I don't want to profess that LA has mastered this. We're still having our own issues here, but I think understanding that one size doesn't fit all. I think that we really need to understand, and I think Herminio brought this up beautifully through the stories that he talked about, the fact that, most folks are dealing with mental health issues that lead to other issues, which can be substance abuse, which can be incarceration, and making sure that services for those folks are attached to permanent supportive housing has been a key lesson that we've also learned out here in Los Angeles. We put a big emphasis on that through the Flex Pool in partnership with the Office of Diversion and Reentry. That's one of the main focuses that we partner up with folks on, is the mental health component, and making sure that folks are connected to therapists, making sure that folks are connected to medication, if that's the case for folks, with their psychiatrist, things like that. With scattered site, that can be, more challenging because you have folks living, throughout the county of Los Angeles in different privately owned units. So obviously that can be more of a challenge in addressing mental health issues. But when it's project based, we can have therapists on site. We can have groups there on site, things like that. And so that's why we're really pushing towards a more holistic approach around permanent supportive housing that is very inclusive of mental health needs for folks.
Can I add something? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I wanted to ask what size caseloads you have. What's the ratio of of case managers or therapists to people in the program with mental health issues?
What's your ratio over there, Herminio? Yeah.
Okay, at Project 180 right now, we have 38 case managers in ICMS, and each one has between 16 and 18 clients. So that's just for that one program, for the intensive case management service program, which is the one that works directly with Brilliant Corners the most. So that 38 by 16, that kind of gives you an idea of the number. And we're short right now, case managers.
Okay, you were going to say something at the same time that I said something.
I wanted to add to what Jose was saying. Another challenge when it comes to the mental health component, something that's very unfortunate is there's like a gray area. Sometimes you can't tell if the mental health is an organic, as they call it, organic mental health need, or if it's drug induced. So that creates a huge challenge. That's something that's very challenging. And I appreciate anyone who does that kind of work. It's a huge challenge because then you medicate someone who didn't need it and now they're worse, or they have a gripe now, because of what they have to do. And you just cannot tell if their mental health is because of the substance use or because of it, because it's organic. So that's a very big challenge.
Have the challenges changed during and now in terms of COVID around drug use and other issues?
You know what they have during the COVID, a lot of what the clients were experiencing, or the participants, the community members, was that they couldn't go anywhere because the housing sites, essentially for COVID safety or PPE, they kind of shut down the houses, and it turned into this thing where they had to implement ODR. LA County ODR had to implement a reception program. So if a client left the house wouldn't take, the interim housing site wouldn't take them back. They wouldn't take them back. These are people who are waiting to get their permanent housing. They wouldn't take them back unless they went to a COVID reception site, which was managed by the Office of Diversion and Reentry. So that was very difficult because a lot of clients or participants, they felt like it was an extension of being incarcerated. They couldn't go anywhere. And it was very challenging, not to mention a lot of them were in the middle of transitioning to their own unit. So you could imagine what that felt like for them. They felt like we were essentially lying to them or not helping them get what they needed. And something else that also happened is a lot of the the participants who were in permanent housing, all of a sudden their supportive services, these are all people who were doing very well. Their supportive service, they couldn't come to the office all of a sudden. They were essentially locked out from the very things that they needed, a simple meeting or a simple conversation with someone who was there to help them, listen to their problems. They didn't have that anymore. So a lot of people started to have the old issues come back, and it was very, very difficult. So yeah, but things are opening up again. One thing I will add, I can't be negative either. I'd be lying if I said, okay, even though all those things were happening, I am impressed that the whole boat didn't sink. I'm impressed with how much positivity was, how we all got through it overall together. And a lot of the guys and a lot of the community members are still there, and they weathered the storm. So that was very impressive. To have to go through that with all the things that they need on top was just an amazing thing to see.
That's wonderful. I am going to ask audience members, participants, that we would appreciate you putting any questions into the Q&A. And I've picked up a couple in the chat and in the Q&A, which we're going to get to very shortly. But I want to ask either or both of you, what do you think you could improve about your model? If you could change anything, what would it be?
More money. I mean, the model itself, I think, is very comprehensive. I think it takes a very holistic approach. It's taken time to develop. We've learned from, all the other folks that we get to serve. We started in San Francisco really helping folks with mental disabilities and physical disabilities. And so we've evolved, over the years, and here in LA County, doing most of our work now with folks that have experienced incarceration along with homelessness. We've found so many parallels there, and so I think that has been really a positive learning for us that we've been able to implement into our model here in LA for the flex pool, especially when we're dealing with folks that have experienced incarceration, because we know they're coming with these things anyway. Full disclosure, I'm a person that experienced incarceration. I was incarcerated for 13 years of my life here in different prisons within the state of California. And as a result of that, I also experienced homelessness, and I never saw myself as a person that was experiencing homelessness when I was actually experiencing that. So I think that's one of the things that we've started to implement into the model is public education and education of officials, government officials, redefining what homelessness really means for people has been something that we've really started to implement to the model. Just a lot more community engagement, because as we enter communities, as we begin to place folks in different communities throughout Los Angeles County, that's been a challenge in some of the areas here in LA County where, NIMBYism exists, where you're not going to have folks here in my backyard. I want to help with the homelessness problem, but as long as it doesn't impact me here. We suffer from that a lot here, so we have to engage the community on a consistent basis. And somebody asked in the do you work with Homeboy Industries to help your folks find work? So, that's just kind of Father Greg sprinkling his magic on this, because prior to Brilliant Corners, I actually worked at Homeboy Industries for a decade. So I was a member of the executive team there as well. So absolutely, Homeboy Industries is one of our many partners. We work with the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. We work with a bunch of different agencies that provide the different services that we know we can't provide. That's one of the biggest lessons that I would really push on, this forum and the folks that are tuning in is, we all have an expertise and we all have valuable experience. And so I think that there's a seat at the table for everybody. That's been our magic formula here in LA County. Government has its place. And for us here in LA County, government's place is almost just fund us, just give us the money, right? we have come to understand that in LA County, the County of Los Angeles and its government structure and its different agencies have done a really poor job. They've acknowledged that. So I'm not talking behind their back. This is something that as a community, we've said, you guys do a really poor job at this. So let's let the folks that have been doing it, the community-based organizations that have been doing this, let's let them continue to do this work and let's fund them in order to grow their work. And so those folks are at the table with their money. I'm talking about government. The CBOs are at the table with their expertise and their experience. And another piece is we've really been inclusive, like I said, of the community, of folks that are directly impacted by homelessness, their perspectives, their experience, making sure that their input is part of the work, that their input is part of the decision-making process. That's why I'm a member of the Public Safety Realignment Team. We deal with all things AB 109. That's a California bill that passed 11 years ago that put a whole bunch of money into LA County around realigning the criminal justice system. You know, and I saw a question in the Q&A around a vision for the carceral system. I mean, Brilliant Corner stands on total deinstitutionalization. So we believe in decarceration at its highest level, as high as we can go in decarcerating people. That's where we want to be at, you know? And so we have a vision where folks are not incarcerated at the level that they're incarcerated currently here in LA County and throughout the nation, right? It's no different in other parts of the country, the rates of incarceration that are happening for folks and the fact that it needs to decrease.
We're working in New York about closing Rikers Island. Mm-hmm. Is there any lessons learned from closing Men's Central that could help us?
We're in the middle of that, JoAnne. I'm glad you asked about that. You know, we have decided to close Men's Central Jail here in LA County. And so, you know, the big thing is who is going to make the decisions around, first of all, the land that the jail stands on today. More importantly, all of the savings that are going to happen. When you close a jail the size of Men's Central Jail here in LA County, which houses well over 5,000 people every single day, there's going to be a huge savings around operations. There's going to be a huge savings around staffing. And so what are we going to do with that money? That's the big issue now here in LA County is what are we going to do with that savings when it happens? Are we going to put that right back into the carceral system, right back into law enforcement agencies? Or are we going to choose to take a more community-based approach and infuse this money into community-based organizations that are already doing the work, newer grassroots community-based organizations that need to grow and need to be supported? That's really the direction that the community here in LA County is saying that the county needs to take. So that's where we're at around the Men's Central Jail closure, JoAnne.
So let me ask a concrete money question, because you said it with a laugh, but you weren't laughing, right? Mm-hmm. With the programs that have rent paid with your Flex program, how are the rents paid? And as rent goes up, how does it not cannibalize support services? So
how does it, and I'll start with the last one. How does it not? It does. There's no way it can, especially here in Southern California, where, you know, rents go up annually at a very high rate. You know, we do have rent control in some sections of LA County, but that is not universal. You know, there are many municipalities that have anti-rent control ordinances in place. And so, you know, the rental rates continue to rise there. But this is an issue that we're also looking at, is how do we continue to subsidize folks' rent and keep up with the rental rates going up if the grants, the funding isn't also increased. So that's the other piece that we're looking at. That kind of would take me down a whole nother path that I'll just say 3 sentences on maybe, is that's why we're really looking at making housing affordable in LA County, period, right?
Let me share something with you then that maybe New York can help with. What we're seeing in the original way in which scattered site apartments were funded, was that you got a grant that covered rent and it covered services. And then over the years, it becomes unworkable because the rent money keeps eating up everything else. But New York City, for example, has been experimenting with certain models where the rent money comes from a separate pool and keeps pace or somewhat keeps pace with inflation, and the service monies stay constant, which is constant is not so great, but it's a whole lot better than getting cannibalized by the rent. So you may want to look into that. I want to ask you one more question and then turn it over to some of the audience questions. Do you have any conviction restrictions in terms of whom you take in and whom you don't?
At Project 180, we don't.
We don't either. There's program-specific stuff. But
yeah.
Are you struggling in the way that we are with the restrictions against where people convicted of sex offenses can live?
You know what? That is a struggle, but we seem to have found our way, which includes even the police department sort of not blocking. I'm surprised actually at how easy it has been for me to work with registered sex offenders and finding placement for them. We're actually finding placement for them. We're finding ways where some of the reforms are actually affecting them as well in a positive way. So I can't tell you that we've had difficulties in housing them and all that, because so far, no. We have more problems maybe in the community when we're helping them get services sometimes. But no, overall, we have not had those problems. At least I haven't. And I've worked with quite a few members of the community with those kind of convictions, and we've been able to help them.
It's a huge problem in New York because we see people being kept in state prison past their release dates because there's nowhere for them to go. And you probably can't find an apartment in Manhattan that's outside of the restrictions, for example. So what I'd like to do is shift to some of the questions in the Q&A. And the first one is, how does the flex pool intersect or not intersect with HUD coordinated entry?
I don't want to give the wrong answer around that. So that's a question that I would probably take back to the team and get back to folks if they really want to know the answer to that, because I wouldn't know what to say to that, JoAnne. It's just not my area of expertise.
Let me ask an ancillary question then. I raised the issue that most permanent supportive housing requires that people be chronically homeless, which precludes anybody coming out of having done any amount of time. Do you have that as a problem in terms of being able to house folks coming out of the criminal justice system who need permanent supportive housing?
Not for us, no. Because here we've been able to redefine homelessness. So if someone is coming out from a period of incarceration, that's actually a qualifier now for us.
Okay. What advice do you have about getting buy-in from landlords to house people with records?
I did workforce development for folks with records for a long time too, when I was over at Homeboy Industries. So for me, it's always kind of a case-by-case basis, getting a feel for the landlord, just like I would get a feel for an employer. And what we got to understand is our job is to really protect the participant, the client, and give as minimal information as is required, right? And so if that's not a requirement that we have to disclose that type of information to a landlord, we're not going to do that. We do come in and engage on the front end, and by this I'm in Brilliant Corners, prior to ever acquiring any units. We're very transparent about who we serve. And so we don't get into specifics about who's going to go into what unit and what type of record or conviction they may have, or what type of issues they may come with. When we deal with landlords, we tell them, these are the different community members that we deal with. These are the issues they may come with. But we guarantee your rent. We want to secure the unit today, not tomorrow, not next month, not when it's ready. We want to start paying you the rent on it today. First and last months, we got you. And that's really what they care about. When you start talking about a consistent, stable source of rental income for a landlord, as long as things don't get too out of control, and like Herminio brought up in his two case studies, you know, that can be dealt with. But as long as you talk about money on the front end and guaranteeing that to the landlord, most of the time, those issues, you know, are secondary priority to them. That was the same thing with workforce development. I came with bonds with different, financial benefits that the employer could benefit from. And once we started talking about that, they were a lot more open to giving anybody an opportunity.
JoAnne, can I add something to that? Thank you for that, Jose. Not to be corny here, but if you build it, they will come. And what we found is the landlords there's a lot of landlords who are willing. You'd be surprised to find they're out there, the ones that are willing to participate, knowing the information, and you don't have to go around in circles. There's plenty of landlords available who are willing and knowingly will work with you guys. They're out there. You just have to develop the right way to conduct some outreach. You will find them. They're available. Got just a little motivation there, a little
That's right.
encouragement.
It makes sense. It makes sense. So I'm doubling back to a different question, which is you're working with a criminal justice population. At what point of their release or post-release or pre-release do you intervene?
At Project 180, it's right out of custody. It's right out of custody. We coordinate we actually help coordinate their release. So we're with them. We pick them up. We're with them right. We work with the LA County Office of Diversion and Reentry, and like Jose said, whenever they're not doing a good job, they've been working on fixing things, you know, and we do a great job of coordinating with each other. So we're with them from the moment they get released. And then when it comes to post-release, it depends on the referral. If it's because probation is doing all kinds of new things, and so they're trying a lot of stuff. The voters are saying, hey, we want you to try these things. So whether it's feasible or not, they're trying a lot of things. I give them credit for that. So when it comes to post-release, it depends. If their order is to remain in probation, then that's something that's up to probation. If it's just non-mental health, then it's kind of voluntary. You know, they can come and go when they please. So there's so many different aspects, and it's on an individual, basis. So we're definitely with them from release. We pick them up and we, coordinate somewhere to stay for them with, Brilliant Corners' help right from the start. And so, that's
what we know is how important that is, because if people are dropped, you often see them crash and burn and then scraping up the pieces. What I don't understand then is that because of HUD definition of homelessness, we have in most places the requirement that people either spend time in a shelter or living under a bridge before they're eligible for HUD-funded programs. Because if you're being released from incarceration, you're not considered homeless until you land in some place that's very dangerous for you and hopefully survive it. How do you avoid that?
Well, we have to, and this is something that goes back to what you asked earlier, what I would change. I would suggest to anyone working on the ground, you need to be more creative. We have to be creative. And oftentimes the definition of homelessness is actually under the participants' control. Oftentimes, if they're coached into understanding, hey, regardless of what their definition is, you are homeless. If they are, like you said, guided the whole way. And that's what I would change is the culture of the case managers. They, I think, need more training to understand that oftentimes they have the definition of the true definition of homeless right in front of them. And, they just need to be a little more creative. I have not had any problems dealing with that unfortunate about that definition. There's a way, there is a way, and it will happen. So
I would add,
cheers for creativity.
I would add something to that, JoAnne, around like a more system level approach is, here in LA County, we're very aware of that. And so we're developing programs that are specifically designed to kind of circumvent those limitations around HUD funding. That's why, we try to also leverage different funding streams. We get funded by BSCC, which is a state grant. We get funded through the Office of Diversion and Reentry. We get funded through the Department of Health Services. And then we have, strong philanthropic partners as well. The Hilton Foundation is a great partner of Brilliant Corners. And so having these different funding streams also lets us get creative, as Herminio stated, at an organizational level, right? As an organization, we can get creative and say, well, you don't qualify for this program, but you qualify for this program, right? Making sure that the resources are there for folks when they need them, because that's the key thing, right? We don't get those windows every day where we can support someone, where we have the opportunity to help someone in their situation around homelessness, or help support them around how they're dealing with the carceral system. So I think we got to take advantage of the opportunities when they come, and that means we got to have different options for folks.
So there are still many more questions we could ask you, but I think we're down to 1 minute of time. So any last words of wisdom and coaching for us?
I'll leave that to my friend Herminio.
Herminio, you get the last word.
Let's just remember that these are people, and they're not below us. We will always find ourselves in them. So I want to just recommend to everyone to remember that, that they are people just like us, and we need to be client-centered. They will show you the way, much like you hear the child will lead. I use that not to infantilize the participants, but because that's how much I love my son. They will teach you. The participants will lead the way. Just let them tell you what they want and listen. They're not always lying and whatnot.
So thank you so much for your wisdom and sharing your experience. Thank you to the network for having this happen. Thank you to the 117 people who are here for this conversation, and let it inform how we work with the people who need our help. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.